Hello, welcome to Miniature Realms. My name's Stuart. The Empire are here finally, and Games Workshop very kindly sent me this to look at a little bit early. Miniature Realms is proudly sponsored by Baron of Dice, premium wargaming dice. Over 500 styles, over 4,000 customer reviews. Welcome to the best dice on the planet. I've actually been lucky enough to have this book for a few weeks. Well, not this actual book. This only arrived a couple of days ago, but originally Games Workshop sent me a PDF version of the book so I could start to read through and plan my content, and I've done just that. I read it cover to cover a couple of times. I've been working on my own list for my own Nuln project and planning it out in the future, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later in the video. And then this, as I say, arrived a couple of days ago, which means I can record this now. And funnily enough, the day I'm recording this, much of this was leaked by someone to another YouTube channel, and I'm sure many of you watching this would have seen that review. It's quite a detailed review, a couple of hour video where it really focuses in on the new rules and the armies of infamy in the list, and I will cover that as well. But this is going to be more of an overview of the whole book. I will touch on the rules and my thoughts on those armies of infamy as well, but it won't be a 2-hour video. I'm going to try and keep it to sort of 30 minutes or under, so it's more of a snapshot for those of you who are interested. They've also sent me the cards, which I've not opened yet, so we can have a quick look at those as well. Really briefly, I'm going to bring this video right back to basics, just for 20 seconds or so. So if you're an existing old world player, just hang in there, it won't take long at all. But I find with every army release, new players are either coming back or joining the game. Maybe they're coming over from Warhammer Total War or just from other game systems, or picking up for the first time, or you're returning from previous editions of Warhammer Fantasy and you want to know what these are. Well, this is the Empire Arcane Journal, but in order to use it, you obviously need your main rulebook. That's a given, really, and most people would have worked that out. There are also 2 core army books, and this is different from those of you who played Warhammer Fantasy before. So rather than a thick army book, your core army list is in one of these, depending on whether you're good or evil. And then you have a main army list in those called a Grand Army. That's your core army list. And these books, these 48-page, and they're all 48-page arcane journals, are a way of adding extra flavour to your army. There's usually some extra special characters, some new units, and 2 armies of infamy, which are kind of set thematic ways of playing the army with some restrictions in there and some bonuses and buffs as well. So with that little bit of admin out the way, let's dive in. As with all the other arcane journals, it's a full colour, glossy, softback book, very nicely presented with a mixture of old classic artwork, some of it slightly recoloured in this sort of nice sepia tone, and lots of new colour plates and things as well. The first 17 pages are lore and background text, and I'm not going to go into any great detail here now. As already mentioned in the video, I'm planning a lore video, much like the previous 2 I have done, and I'll focus that very much around the time period for Warhammer the Old World, rather than covering the vast amount of history that came before and after that in the established lore that we already have. But needless to say, after setting the scene, it very much sets up the state of the Empire as it is at the time of the Old World, explaining a little bit more about the fractured Old World rather than the one emperor ruler that we were used to if we played fantasy in the days before. What I will say is it's a really nice expansion to the lore that's in the core rulebook, adding a little bit more depth. Not loads, but we get a little snippet about each of the major provinces and cities. We've got some lovely colour plates showing the main provinces, and I'll be doing a painting tutorial for all 4 of those in one video soon. That's in the works right now. And much like the other arcane journals, the basic politics and geography is laid out, and then we start to get a little bit more flavourful history about what's going on in the Empire at the time of the Old World, leading into a little bit of more modern day or old world
themed storyline, talking about campaigns. We've already seen an element of that in the Warriors of Chaos Arcane Journal, and then it builds towards the Battle of Sturgill Hills, which is a narrative battle, and there's one of these in each of the Arcane Journals as well. I really enjoyed the lore in this Arcane Journal, much like I have in all of the others. It's well presented, it's nicely written, it's easy to read, and they all tend to build towards this little scenario in the booklet, which are also really easy to play as well. None of them so far have needed armies that are huge, nothing too vast and crazy, and it's great when you have those really big kind of scenarios that we maybe saw in the 8th edition rulebook way back, but this is achievable. It's a 2,500 point aside battle, and if you're building an Empire army, it's definitely something to build towards. There's nothing too crazy, you don't suddenly need to build a whole castle or anything like that, so it's a good way of getting involved in the lore that you've just read and feeling like you're in that time period. It's just a nice little touch. And then we have a few pages of colour plates, the kind of artwork that we've already seen in the main rule book and in the Forces of Fantasy anyway, but there's some of the new units that weren't shown off, like the war wagon, that kind of thing. They're always nice to have in the middle of your army books. They have been present for as long as I can remember in Warhammer, and it's cool to see them here along with the new characters. And now we get to the meat of the book. We start to get towards the rules, but not entirely. They kind of overlay with the lore as well, and I quite like the way that's presented in the book. So we have the city-state of Nuln first, and we have a couple of pages of lore. We have some colour plates, some examples of the Nuln artillery, and little bits of flavour, which is really, really nice within your army book. But you flip the page, and then you have your Empire of Man, city-state of Nuln, Army of Infamy. The first thing you will notice is the lack of level 4, and that's pretty big. They're very prevalent at the moment in the game. Some will say they are needed for magic defense. I wouldn't necessarily deny that, but a lot of that sort of commentary comes from the competitive scene. So if you play at home with your friends and you have very laid back games, might not be something that concerns you anyway. I can imagine competitive players may be looking at that and seeing that as a bit of an issue. Maybe there'll be ways of having multiple level 2s, but even then your range of defense of your magic might struggle against some builds. It's really hard to comment on. I'm a casual player, but I do enjoy keeping an eye on the competitive scene, and I'm a big believer that the competitive scene does trickle down into club play, and then it just means it trickles down by nature into casual play. When people are playing points matched games, they quite often want to make sure that they got a chance of winning. But I don't want to focus on the lack of level 4. I think there's a really good narrative reason for that, and maybe a balanced reason as well. When you consider the extra firepower you may be encouraged to take as part of a Nuln army list. There are plenty of other characters that you can take, of course, your generals and your lectors, your captains of empire, master mages still, witch hunters and priests. You've obviously got no chapter masters there, but you can still have a war altar as well. As we move into core, the first thing you see is a 1+ requirement for Nuln state troops or Nuln veteran state troops. I'll cover that off a little bit more when we look at the special rules on the next page in a moment, but that's nice to see in some regards. I think we should have a unit of infantry in our Empire armies, but I know some people would see that as a negative as well, because maybe infantry not being the most competitive in the game meta at the moment. Again, if you're looking at more competitive games, infantry maybe has a little bit of a problem getting table time or being effective at the moment in the way the game's being played. Something that's really cool is a unit of 0-1 outriders per 1,000 points in core, and that's really cool to see them in core. And they also have a little buff as well called Veteran Outrider, which we'll cover a little bit later on. So that's a really good thing, a really interesting thing. You can also have free company, militia and archers. In special, we have Empire Greatswords, Pistoliers, Outriders again, Empire Knights and War Wagons. So you can have Knights, but they're just not core in this army list. That's only in the Grand Army list. You can also have 0-3 war machines per 1,000 points as well, and they're great cannons and mortars. As you get to rare, you have Empire Road Wardens, which is a new unit, and then you also have up to 2 war machines per 1,000 points from your Hellblaster volley gun, Hellstrom rocket battery, and a steam tank, which is the same limit as before for 1 for 1,000 points. And then we have the special rules, and all armies of infamy have them in some way or another, sometimes a buff, sometimes a bit of a restriction or something to really add to the flavour of that list. And the first one is big guns, no fear. It basically means Empire engineers in the city-state of Nuln army, and any unit they have joined gain the immune to psychology special rule while there is a friendly war machine within their command range. And in this army of infamy, engineers can be battle standard bearers. So I can see a scenario that maybe you'll have your BSB in a unit of state troops that's deployed next to your cannons, and they're all getting their immune to psychology special rule, and also their engineers are able to buff that cannon for rerolls and things as well. So you might get some cool synergies. And while we're talking about artillery, the next special rule is entrenched position, and that's for your artillery, and during deployment you can mark them as entrenched, and that gives them partial cover and counts as defending a low linear obstacle. If you move the war machine, you lose that later on. So not game changing, but a good fun thing to do, and may well be useful. Continuing that theme, which is no surprise, with a Nuln artillery army, we have gun limbers. 0 to 1 war machine per 1,000 points gains the Vanguard and Veteran special rules, and there's different points levels depending on which machine you choose. The most expensive, but maybe the most popular for this, would be the Hellblaster Bodygun, adding 15 points. But you imagine making that Vanguard move at the beginning of a turn, meaning you're in range straight away, and if you win your roll for first turn, that could be quite nasty if your opponent has deployed right on the edge of their deployment zone. And for both that, the entrenched position and the gun limbers, some really cool fun modelling chances there. I wonder with the entrenchments if the 4-12 ones would come back. Probably not, those moulds are probably long gone, and maybe they'll be a little bit too big, but I've got some ideas of how I might model those already, which might be fun for a future video. Now onto smaller guns, we have handgun drill, and once per game, each detachment of state missile troops in the City of Nuln army can fire 1 additional rank. Now, detachment means detachment, so it's not any unit of missile troops. It will be a detachment from your main block, and the way detachments work with Empire is you can have additional units that don't need their own command, and they use the command of the sort of parent unit. I'm going to have some actions around that as well. So that's quite cool. Once per game is probably the thing that's a little bit disappointing, as we see later on with the rest of this army list and then the profiles and things in this book. I don't think this army is going to be overpowered. Yes, the potential for having lots of shots is there, but that would have been quite cool if you could always fire in 2 ranks. You'd imagine if they're trained, that's, you know, an extra few shots here and there isn't going to be too bad. I can imagine a lot of detachments is just going to be of 10 miniatures. So in reality, we'll be talking 5 extra shots a lot of the time. Would it be that game breaking? I would have loved to have seen that as all the time, a rule you could use all the time and always fire in 2 ranks. That would be really cool. Then we have the Nuln state troops, and we've already established that this is a 1+. We have to have a unit of Nuln state troops for the army in your core. There's a few restrictions around these. They can be standard or veteran, which is fine. They have to have halberds, and any detachments have to be either swordsmen or handgunners. This is really leaning into the theme of Nuln. Rather than spears and crossbows, this is very much halberds and handgunners, which is cool. This is fine. They might not be what people would want to always take. Well, this changes that. I don't think they're bad choices, and I quite like that it forces you to take something that's thematic. That's the way these armies should work, so I think that's pretty cool. Final special rule for the Nuln state troops detachments is you may have a sergeant or champion for free, something you're not able to do with detachments in the main army list, in the grand army list, because their leadership is covered by their parent unit. I mean, it's quite interesting. I'm not sure you necessarily need them or would want them, but if they're free, you're going to take them. I can't see why you wouldn't. Maybe it's there so that you can take a Hochland long rifle with your detachment state troops, which is something you couldn't do before. If you wanted a Hochland long rifle, you'd have to have state troops, missile troops on their own. So it is cool to be able to get that Hochland in there. I do find, again, they're those things that get trimmed off your army list for cost. What I really would have loved there, rather than giving you a free sergeant, is them actually giving you 1 free Hochland per 10 men. For every 10 men you get 1 free Hochland. Maybe that's a little bit too much, but that would have been cool and a way to really lean into their shooting prowess. But I imagine what they're leaning into there is the leadership and the trained nature of the Nuln city-state troops. The final special rule is veteran outriders, and not only now can we have them in core, up to 2 units in a 1,000-point list, and have them in special as well, they're now veteran and they're not subject to the ponderous special rule, which really makes them better for the same points. That's a really nice buff. I think we will see units of those in core making up points, especially for people who don't want to put too many state troops in there. Maybe with some Empire archers as well, really building in that sort of movement, skirmishing shenanigans. We'll come back to the special characters and some of the units mentioned in there as we get to them later in the book, but let's have a look at the knightly orders. And just like with the Nuln army, we actually start with a little bit of lore here again, which is really cool and a really nice colour plate with some examples of Knights of the Blazing Sun and Knights Panther livery. So let's dig into the Empire of Man army of infamy, and you can see just by looking at it there that it's quite small and quite restricted, though there are some ways to get other units that aren't listed here into your knightly orders lists. The first thing you'll notice again is lack of a level 4, but not just lack of a level 4, no wizards at all in the character section. You can have a Grand Master, unsurprisingly, and you +1 for a Chapter Master, which I imagine you're going to have as your BSB. You can have Lector of Sigmar or High Priest of Ulrich, and you can have Witch Hunters and Priestess Sigmar and Ulrich as well, and a War Altar, which maybe you'll be taking that as a mount for a Lector in many cases and as the General of the Army instead of running a Grand Master. But very, very interesting, much more limited, but there are ways of adding things in, as we'll see a little bit later on. In core, you can have a unit of Inner Circle Knights. It's just the one, not per 1,000. It's unsurprising that that's there. Cool to see, and you can also take them later on as well in special. Of course, you can have extra Inner Circle Knights. It's 1+ unit of Empire Knights per 1,000. Again, no surprise at all there. They were obviously going to fill out the core. They're used in core of Grand Armies quite a lot at the moment as well. For core, they're a pretty good option. It might not be as good as other cavalry in the game, but you're going to be taking them and you expect to see them in an Empire of Man Knightly Order army list. And there's also Empire Archers, so you do have some foot sloggers there, and useful ones at that too. In special, you have Inner Circle Knights again, and Demigriffs, which I imagine where most of the points money will be spent here. You can have a unit of Empire State Troops or Missile Troops per 1,000 points if you wanted to. I imagine most people won't be taking those, but if they did, maybe it's more likely to be Missile Troops. And for rare, you can have Pistoliers. Now, Pistoliers aren't particularly popular in this game at the moment. The Road Warders, which we'll look at the profile later on, seem to be what people want Pistoliers to be, but I guess this is very much a lore thing which isn't talked about a lot. Pistoliers are future knights. They're young and they're headstrong, and the fact they have impetuous isn't great in the game and doesn't work for the way people want to use them, but it does fit the lore. It just means sadly that they're not being taken much at all, and now that we have Road Warders, I think people are more likely to take those anyway. So it's looking a little bit tough for knights in some ways. Super themey, but no magic, there's no war machines, and you've just got knights, and it makes you wonder how you're going to compete or win games, but I do think it looks fun. But we have knightly order special rules, and they do add a little bit of flavour back. And there are special rules as well a little bit further on page 44, which give the rules for the knightly orders for the Empire. I think that probably should be on the next page. It's logically you'll be flicking backwards and forwards, so I'm actually going to skip to that page after this, so we're going to go out of order of the book a little bit there. But the knightly orders, it gives you special rules for 5 named orders. Obviously if you're using your own, you might not be using this Empire of Man knightly order army list, but we have the Knights Panther, which means you can include Empire Knights or Inner Circle Knights belonging to a different order, Order of the White Wolf. as a mercenary choice. That's their special rule. That's what it gives you. Knights of the White Dwarf, you can actually have Tutored and Guard as a special choice in your army. So that, again, that's adding an extra unit as opposed to what we saw there on the standard Empire of Man Knightly Order army list. And you can also have 1 unit of Free Company Militia as core per 1,000 points, but you can't take any Lectors of Sigmar, Priests of Sigmar, or Witch Hunters, which makes a lot of sense. But like I mentioned earlier on, these army lists are very much about theme and flavour. So what it gives on one hand, it takes away on another. So we move on to Knights of the Blazing Sun, and they can actually have up to 2 Master Mages as character choices per 1,000 points. So you can have 4, and they can also have 1 Great Cannon or Cannon per 1,000 points as well. So you can get a couple of guns in there as well. The question is, I suppose, could you build a Knights of the Blazing Sun army using the Grand Army list and have less restriction? Maybe, and it might look very, very similar. But again, this list is here as theme as much as it is as a gameplay thing. So it really depends on where you sit on that spectrum of competitive versus theme and the way you want to play your games. Knights of More allow you to include Wizard Lords and Master Mages, so you got your magic back with this one, but you lose your Priests of Sigmar and Ulrich, and that makes a lot of sense, I guess. I suppose the question again would be, could you build an army around the Grand Army which gives you a similar theme, a similar amount of knights and things like that as well, without some other restrictions? Yes, you probably could, but if you want to go pure theme, maybe you'd use the Knightly Orders list, but they're not jumping out as some huge benefit here. There's no extra benefit other than choosing from that army list. Whereas with the Nuln State army list, there were proper buffs in the special rules, and it feels like these special rules on the Knightly Orders are much more geared around flavour. Knights of the Fiery Heart means you can have Flagellants as rare, which is cool as well, because you're probably not going to be spending those points on Pistoliers. You do lose the ability to have Priests of Ulrich, but again, that makes total sense. I quite like that. That's cool. Add some Flagellants. Imagine some rabid, crazy men in your army on foot next to all your shiny knights. I quite like that from a theme point of view, so that would be quite cool. So let's jump ahead to the Knightly Orders rules on page 44 and 45, just before the magic items. And this isn't Army of Infamy only, this is something to add flavour and rules to Knightly Orders for your Grand Army as well. So the rules apply for both, some changes in the way they're chosen. But essentially, in order to have admittance into the order, you have to pay points. And those points will then give you some special rules in return. So this isn't, as I said, part of that Army of Infamy rules. But by choosing a particular knightly order, you will have buffs and it will affect the way that your army plays. So it shows you the points you need for each of your characters, or your Grand Masters or your Chapter Masters. And then points that you need to spend extra per miniature, per knight, for all of your knights or inner circle knights or demigryphs. So let's quickly skim over these. Order of the Knights Panther special rules. You must take lances. You get to re-roll 1s while making a charge roll. Gain hatred against Warriors of Chaos, Beastmen, Brayhares and Demonic models. And your Grand Master gains the magical resistance special rule. Order of the White Wolf. Unsurprisingly, they must be equipped with halberds or great weapons. They gain the Furious Charge special rule, which probably makes these, along with the Tutored and Guard, they can have the Army of Infamy, maybe the best choice or the strongest choice competitively. And in addition, again, the Grand Master gets a special rule as well, and he has a 5-up ward save against any wounds suffered by flaming attacks. Order of the Blazing Sun, the models gain evasive and flaming attack special rules, and a Grand Master, Chapter Master or Inner Circle Knights get +1 to their combat result. Order of the Knights of More gain hatred for undead models and have a 6-up ward against any wounds suffered against non-magical attacks, and then additionally, of course, the Chapter Master, etc., gains fear and magical attack special rules. Order of the Fiery Heart can only be joined by Chapter Masters belonging to the same order or Lector Priest of Sigmar. They gain hatred at enemy wizards, orcs and goblins and have a +1 initiative during the first round of combat, and their Chapter Masters, Inner Circle, etc. Reroll hits to auto wound of a natural 1 made during the combat phase. Now I've spent a little bit of time on those 2 army lists because I believe that they kind of give the flavour for the whole book. I will look at the profiles and the special characters now, but I'm not going to be reading and discussing every item of equipment or special rule. You can go away and look at some of the more detailed rules for that. I think they slot nicely into those army lists, but I really wanted to give a fuller picture for those because it's hard to leave the odd thing out. We have 2 brand new special characters with new models as well. I love them both, and I'm looking forward to bringing painting tutorials as soon as I can, or at least painting videos anyway. So first off, we have Harold Gebbinson, Grandmaster of the Knights Panther. Now he's pretty fighty and pretty fun. How competitive he is, I don't know. I'll leave that up to more competitive players. With the weapons got a 7, he's got a leadership of 9, he's got 4 attacks, a host of special rules. He can re-roll natural 1s while making a charge roll. He's a skilled duelist, and he has killing blow with his beast Reaver as well. So I can imagine he's going to do some damage. Whether he can stand up to big chaos lords and dragons and things like that, I'm not so sure, but let me know what you think of him in the comments. I love the miniature, can't wait to paint him. Next up we have General Han von Lowenhag, the first of the 2 new character miniatures that were revealed to us. I really like this one, just because it fits in with the theme of what I'm trying to build in my army. Is he as good? He's a foot slogging general at the end of the day, so he might be hard to keep him alive. You've got to put him in a unit. He's definitely not going to be standing up to any of the big killy lords on dragons. He's not that kind of character, but I quite like the way it works. So really fun thematic rules as far as I'm concerned. Again, are you going to see him on a competitive scene? Who knows? I don't know. My guess would be no. It's not the scene I'm going to be on. Hopefully I will have him ready and I can have this army ready, and I'll be using him at the Throne of Skulls. And I love his special rules. The first one is Mercenary Commander, which basically means you can have mercenaries in your army, of which are 25% rather than 20 in the Nuln army of infamy, and they benefit from his inspiring presence, and they don't suffer the misbehaving mercenary rules, which is really cool. So for me, that means it opens up Imperial Ogres, opens up Imperial Dwarves, that kind of thing in my Empire army, and for me that's enough for the thematic army I'm aiming to build for Nuln. He also has Strategic Mastery, which gives you a +1 or -1 modifier to your roll-off for first turn, which again could really help you get that first turn and get your guns in your Nuln army firing first. And I love that kind of theme and synergy that's there. Just really, really cool. He does have a Griffin Helm as well, which gives him a 5-up ward save, which will help, and Judgment, his big beast of a hammer, which is strength +2, -2 AP, magical attacks, multiple wounds kind of thing. We have 5 new unit profiles now, and I really love 3 of them, so it's always a good place to start. The first up, we have Harbingers of Doom, fun little model, part of the old Empire Command set, I believe. I mean, it's just a little bit of fun, 65 points, and it's a nice little buff to your flagellant units, I suppose. Other than that, I've not got an awful lot to say about it. I'd love to know if anyone's got any cool ideas of how you're going to use them. Pop it in the comments below. Next up, we have the Teutogan Guard, which is something that was predicted early on, and no surprise, and it's great because it means you can have your Ulrich themed armies, or at least your Ulrich themed units, which is something we probably haven't seen since Storm of Chaos way back in the depths of 6th edition. And they're pretty good as well. They are essentially slightly better greatswords, I imagine, in the way they work. So I like them. They look great. I will pick them up at some point. It's not a theme I'm personally doing at the moment. I also think by running the Knightly Orders and running the Knights of the White Wolf, you're able to take these guys as well. So that might be a kind of a backdoor way into doing a very Ulrich themed army. So again, I'd love to see in the comments below if you've got any plans to do an Ulrich themed army, and would you do it via the Knightly Orders because the Knights of the White Wolf look pretty good, or would you do it through the Grand Army list and add these in? Then we're on to some really fun stuff, at least in my opinion anyway. Imperial Ogres. We knew they were coming since the original reveal. They showed off one of the old Marauder miniatures, which are absolutely fantastic, and I can't wait to get painting mine once I've ordered them. I just love that this profile is in the book. We have the Imperial Dwarves in the Dwarf Arcane Journal, which could easily fit in this book as well. It makes sense it's in the Dwarf one. And this is just another example of a Dogs of War unit that we can see in other lists and be used. And with General von Lowenhag, they can be used and use an inspiring presence and not have the misbehaving mercenaries rule. And I just love it. The biggest problem I had was wanting Imperial Ogres and Imperial Dwarves and just finding the points to squeeze them in. But I'll come back to that when I sum up at the end. Now we move on to Empire Road Wardens, and I think we'll see these used the way people want to use Pistoliers, and we'll see their Pistoliers models used with this profile, and that's fair enough. We saw them in the Army of Infamy for Nuln mentioned earlier on as well, which is really cool. So you can have these as the Guardians of the Imperial Highways, 1 unit per 1,000 points in a Grand Army anyway, so it's not limited to the Army of Infamy at all. And it says for representing the unit in the game, using Empire Outriders and then adding State Missile Troop crossbows, but you can also exchange them for pistols as well. You're just going to be using Pistolier models a lot of the time. I'm going to be building mine with crossbows just so they look different. I like the theme of that rather than just using them as pseudo Pistoliers. I mentioned earlier, I think Pistoliers are future knightly orders in some way. These feel narratively different for me, so I've already started messing around with these, and I'll probably make that a video at some point as well. I want to put some slightly different helmets on. I want them to look like highwaymen almost, so I think they're really cool. But you can add some really fun things to them as well. So they're ballistic skill 4 for a start. If you have a captain, it's ballistic skill 5. You can add for points, it does cost, but you can have feigned flight added. You can add Vanguard special rule and ambushers and scouts as well. So you can really make these guys quite annoying to your opponent and give you some real tactical movability, I suppose, especially in the Army of Nuln, where you could have a very sort of static army with a big chunk of your army with your main block of compulsory troops, and your cannon and things aren't going to be moving anywhere, trying to be stuck somewhere near a hill. But maybe you can really harass your opponents with units like this, with your Outriders, and really get in their face and make them come to you where you want them to. So I think they're going to be really interesting and really important to try and make what would be a very static army more maneuverable. And finally, we're on to the Empire War Wagon. It's just a beautiful miniature, as far as I'm concerned, that's coming back. And so many of these rules are not so much lifted but inspired by the way it used to work before. So you've got your 6 different crew with all with different weapons, and it's going to be a really interesting unit. I have no idea how useful it's going to be. It's such a different thing to what you normally see on the table as well. It's obviously a heavy chariot, so that's going to be interesting, and maybe we'll see multiple of these if people are rich and want to buy an awful lot of them, or able to use alternatives or build them or something or other. But some really cool special rules that make it useful as a heavy chariot, running into people, good in combat. But then you've also got some interesting weapons and things as well, all the same as they were originally. So you've got your blunderbuss, your long rifle, your repeating rifle, ball and chain, hook and halberd, and man catcher. Great stuff. It can be a character mount for an engineer as well. I'm not sure whether it's something I would do, but it could be cool. Let me know how you think they're going to be used. Are you going to use them in your army? You're going to have more than one? I'm not. I'm just going to buy the one and have it as a cool centerpiece miniature. But it's one of those things that you can imagine someone coming up with a really odd spammy list and having lots of them and then being really hard to deal with. But for me, it's just a beautiful miniature with a nice set of rules, and I'm going to have lots of fun playing it on the tabletop. Finally, we have a couple of pages of extra magic items, which are additions to the standard ones or ones already found in the Grand Army list, which is already cool. A lot of these are focused around the themes of this book, so your Nuln or your knightly orders. And I'm not going to read them all through one by one. There are already places you can go and see that, but I will pick out my favourites or a couple of things that really stood out to me. Now, with that Nuln theme and the army I'm looking at, and having to take that block of core halberdiers, I'm looking at the Banner of the Free State of Nuln, 20 points, which gives them stubborn. It's cool, it's thematic. Whether it's worth 20 points or not, I'm not sure. Let me know what you think in the comments. But I like that one. It's nice and simple. It's not too expensive. And this gives them a little bit of extra boost. And hopefully they will stay around a little bit longer. Next favourite one, mainly because of the name, I think, is the squints often marvellous magnify for 35 points. It means that the bearer or the unit, which might make it more worth it, don't suffer the -1 to hit modifier for shooting at long range. Again, if you're squeezing that in an army, you've got a large unit of handgunners with a Hochland long rifle engineer in that unit or something, could be really good maybe, but I've already found when trying to build an army list, it's quite hard to squeeze extra units and things anyway. You run out of points really fast, and I think 35 points on top of that will mean it's one of those nice things that gets added and then removed towards the end of your army list building. I also like the twin-tailed wand, which basically means you get to attempt to cast a spell for a second time. It is 40 points though, but if you're again stuck with a low magic army, so Army of Infamy of Nuln, when you've only got level 2s and you're struggling a little bit there, this might be handy, but again it is 40 points. I'm not sure I'd find that from. Well, that's it. That's the Empire of Man Nuln Army book, and I've, as I said, I've had this or access to this for a few weeks now, so it's really cool. I've really enjoyed reading it through. Love the lore, love the whole feel of the book. Really enjoy the Nuln Army of Infamy. I think the lore and the theme throughout is very well done. It feels like it's a Nuln army list. The special character as well just really builds into that, and I'm genuinely really excited about building an army list for the Throne of Skulls for that. I mean, I think it's the perfect kind of event maybe for that kind of Army of Infamy. I'm not a competitive player, but I do keep an eye on the scene. I imagine that the result of that will be that the competitive players to think that this book hasn't solved what they would say are the problems with Empire in terms of making the inventory more playable, but maybe that's a wider thing with where the game works and where the competitive meta works. If you're a casual player or narrative player, you might not see any issues with that anyway, because you're just going to pick the armies and collect and paint the armies that you want to that look good on the table. But we may see some things that are just out in the future, and then they could change the way these army lists work. If we see some restrictions in the future via FAQs or a special match play guide or something like that restricts some of the things that we see a lot, some of the flying monsters, some of the level 4 spam, that kind of stuff, then these, in terms of a power level, if you're interested in that kind of thing, may well get better. But I absolutely love that Nuln theme. I have had problems with it though, and it's just wanting to have lots of flavour in there, but I'm running out of points quite quickly. And I find it more so writing Empire army lists than I do for writing Warriors of Chaos army lists or writing Dwarf army lists. You run out of points with everything, but I find it with Empire all the time. And I don't know why that is. I want infantry in there. They don't feel very strong, but I still run out of points to have them. So I wanted a bigger block, and I find I'm cutting it just so I could have more unit types on the table and more flavour. So I think that a 2,500 point game, maybe even 3,000, will be perfect for that Nuln Army of Infamy. I think at 2,000 points, it feels a squeeze because you want to get more in there. You want to get that flavour in there. But all in all, I really like this book. I think they've done a really good job, and the narrative's really strong throughout. I'm a little bit concerned that people will see the Nuln Army in a negative way as a gun line and all of the negative connotations that come with that. I honestly don't think that cannons and handguns are going to offset flying monsters and spamming magic and level 4s from a competitive point of view. So I don't think it's going to be a super competitive army, and I don't think it needs to be a negative play experience playing against it either. If your Nuln armies, including your war wagons, including your outriders, your road wardens, there's going to be plenty going on, movement there to engage with as an opponent as well as a player as well. Yes, there'll be a section that is a line where guns and things are coming from, but I think that's fine. I don't think it necessarily has to be pure gun line any more than you could already do with Empire. And in fact, in many ways, a Grand Army gun line with multiple spammed level 4s might feel more like a gun line than the Nuln one. I think they've done a good job of adding some other theme there, especially with the bringing in for mercenaries. For me, the way I'd sum it up, it reminds me of the city of Nuln that you read in a Gotrek and Felix novel, with all of those different cultures brought there. It feels like that in an army list rather than pure guns. And I think that's cool, and that's exactly what I wanted and why I'm so excited about running the Nuln army. The knightly orders, in my opinion, is not quite as clear, but the narrative is still strong within them. It might just be me personally that I don't have such an affinity with the knightly orders as I do with the foot slogging empire, and I think that that's probably got a lot to do with it. Probably less strong overall from a competitive point of view, and the reason I keep mentioning competitive is because people are interested in that as much as people are interested in narrative, and I'm trying to kind of cover both camps to a certain extent. As I said already, I'm not a super competitive player, so someone with the right mindset will be able to look at those rules and change them into competitive lists much quicker than I can. So I'll be watching closely and getting a bit of an idea of that. Love to hear people's thoughts in the comments, any ideas and things, because I find it really, really interesting the way different people's minds work and things they see that I just haven't seen here. So let me know in the comments below what you think of the book overall. Games Workshop have very kindly provided me with other bits as well, so there's going to be loads of content for this release coming up, so bear with the channel over the coming days, weeks, month or so and beyond, because there will be lots more stuff around. There's a lot of painting things as well, which is what I primarily do on the channel. So there'll be some fun painting stuff, some new miniatures, some projects like the state troop that I mentioned, doing all 4 of those provinces in one video. So do look out for those as well. If you've enjoyed the video, give it a like, drop a comment below, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, so you don't miss any of those up and coming videos. If you'd like to support the channel further, there's loads of links in the video description below. I have a Patreon where there's painting, coaching, as well as just basic support. There's affiliate links and things as well. So thank you very much for watching. Take care, and I'll catch you soon.